I was growing up, there were prominent families on the island whose daughters were not only beautiful, but were the best dressed. These families had come from parents of means and education and were looked up by the people of the community. They either owned large tracts of lands, stores, or held prominent positions in the government. They were also of closer Spanish ancestry than the rest of the people. They dressed in European costumes and wore shoes. One of my dreams and ambitions was to dress like the girls of the Martinez, the Duartes, the Torres, the Calvos, or the Herreros, and to attend parties where these girls were invited. Determined to fulfill her dreams and ambitions, Johnston spent her first teacher's paycheck at roughly 35 cents a day, and this would have been around 1907, to buy luxuries, shoes, stockings, and a parasol. By 1913, as Guam's highest paid Chamorro teacher at $54 a month, Johnston was well on her way to becoming one of the beautiful and well-dressed elite Chamorro women that she once secretly admired. Her success and stature could have even gained her honorary member status to the shoe gang. Johnston's other dream, to attend the same socials as these girls, was also coming true. One need only look through the Navy's Guam newsletter, the only newspaper at the time, to see that Johnston was already socializing with both American and elite Chamorro women. She joined both on week-long excursions aboard American ships to Manila, at swimming parties hosted by Americans in various spots on the island, like the exotic-sounding Petey by the Bay, as the Americans called their veritable playground. Such outings also began to fill the pages of the Guam newsletter, which again began to trouble the naval authorities, concerned that family and friends back in the States would see their relatives' tour of duty to Guam as all fun and play. The Navy urged military personnel to get back to the charitable and civic work. Civic work included small matter types of projects like the annual Christmas pageants that were organized by ladies of the station and elite Chamorro women, including Johnston, where every Chamorro child in attendance received a gift. The novelty of giving and receiving gifts at Christmas had become so popular that once, when news that the transport carrying the gifts was going to be delayed, the Navy decided to postpone Christmas in Guam. In fact, these annual Christmas pageants had become so big a feat that only the most capable of administrators were able to manage them. First among this class was Agata Johnston. According to one article in the Guam newsletter, the annual pageant and entertainment was a monument to her ability. Johnston's stellar performance as an organizer of pageants and other annual entertainments in the pre-war years resulted in a reputation that essentially had her booked, even in the midst of cleaning up a war-torn island. She even held the fort, so to speak, until the United Servicemen's Organization, the USO, established a foothold on Guam. Guam, which enjoyed liberation in July 1944, before the war formally ended, was already teeming with hundreds of thousands of such servicemen. Even still, Guam did not enjoy the celebrity and pin-up lace shows for which the USO was already becoming famous around the world, as it dutifully followed American ships, flags, and airplanes. Absent of the USO at the time, Johnston recalls the first booking when the island was still literally in shambles and ruins. Sergeant Little, who used to be in Guam before the war, witnessed some of the Christmas pageants and other school entertainments I used to direct with my high school teachers and students. He asked me if I could put on some kind of entertainment for the men in his camp at the 3rd Marine Division stationed in Jotnya. I told him everything was scattered throughout the island and I had no way of contacting people. He offered the use of a jeep and a truck. In fact, her performances had become so popular among the armed forces that Johnston and her troop, which initially included her son and daughter and 2 other teachers, went camp to camp and followed all ships in the harbor for nearly 2 months. The shows eventually included members of the shoe gang for whom she served as chaperone, and continued until the arrival of the Yoshos from the States, and until her time was needed to reopen George Washington High School in November 1944. For Johnston, some of the highlights included performing for the USS Arkansas and for the Marines returning from Iwo Jima. These performances included Chamorro stick dance performances, Guamanian songs, Polynesian hula, and Chamorro renditions of the Andrews Sisters and Shirley Temple. These performances stereotyped the exotic Pacific Island woman, but also showcased another now familiar cultural performance in full glory, Chamorro American patriotism, now forged out of the ashes of 2.5 years of Japanese occupation. But in Chamorro American patriotism in Guam, Chamorro women especially were held to different standards than Chamorro men. I've been through 3 campaigns, as one Army sergeant told a reporter for Yank magazine, and I'll be goddamned if anybody ever threw a flower in my Jeep or gave me a drink of wine. An American photographer documenting the Pacific Theater also commented that he had never seen so many smiling Native women in their ragged vest honoring the troops. The Yank magazine reporter interviewed 2 of the smiling Native women, Agata Johnston and her daughter Marion, and told of a 3rd. The article can be regarded as setting the stage, so to speak, for a later display of Chamorro patriotism in a subsequent CBS newsreel. Together, the article and the newsreel display the sexualized body of Chamorro American patriotism. The Yank article opens by introducing the reader back in the States to Johnston, who is described as, quote unquote, an attractive Chamorro woman. The reader learns a sad story. She fell in love and married an American Marine, but when the Japs invaded and seized America's Pacific Island outposts in December 1941, the American was captured and banished to a concentration camp in Japan, where he died a year later. Enter Marion, a 21-year-old belle of Agana, whose story also involved a romance with another American Marine. She had in fact been on a date with him just a week before the day of infamy, in which he suffered his heroic death during the Japanese bombardment. Against these 2, a 3rd unnamed Chamorro woman is introduced. Quote, a girl, almost equally attractive, but one who was not entirely unresponsive, meaning she was open to the advances of Jap officers. Not much more of substance or interest is provided about her. In her stark contrast to the good Chamorro women by virtue of their love for Marine men, this Chamorro woman is figured as bad by vice of her affairs with quote-unquote Jap officers. By stark contrast and opposition, her affairs with Jap officers render her a traitor, thereby putting into sharper focus or relief the patriotism of mother and daughter through their fidelity to their beloved and martyred Marines. Yet it was a Navy radioman, George Tweed, who cast aspersions on Johnston's patriotism and loyalty to America. Unlike William Johnston and his daughter's lover, Tweed survived the invasion by running to the hills and being cared for throughout Japanese occupation by Chamorro families, most of whose members suffered at the hands of the Japanese because of their assistance. In a famous story, Johnston tracks Tweed down and pleads with him to surrender because too many people were being killed on his behalf. Johnston herself was severely beaten by the Japanese over Tweed's whereabouts. Still, Tweed basically charged her with being unpatriotic, saying that he would submit her to the military authorities who would, he assured her, quoting, and I quote here, have no compunctions about shooting a lady for treasonous offenses. Tweed was dead wrong in his assessment of this woman's loyalty to America. To understand the depths, but also the possibilities of this Chamorro-born American patriotism, we need to return to Agata Johnston's relationship to Governor Dorn and her soon-to-be husband, William, the Marine. For this relationship also gives us a sense of what I want to call a a proto